It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon in Atlanta, June 15th, 2023. The Family Feud studio lights beamed across the set, bright and warm, bouncing off the glossy podiums and shimmering audience seats. To most people, it was just another taping day, another round of fast questions and witty banter, led by the ever-charismatic Steve Harvey. But on this particular day, something far more powerful than comedy or competition was about to unfold. Something that would silence laughter, move strangers to tears, and eventually spread across the world like a sacred flame. The Patterson family from Chicago, Illinois, had made the trip with a kind of energy that filled the studio even before they introduced themselves. They were dressed sharp but simple, flashing nervous smiles as cameras rolled. Leading their team was William Patterson, an 82-year-old retired aerospace engineer who, despite his age, carried himself with the steady dignity of a man who had lived through wars, raised generations, and learned the priceless art of patience. At first, William had resisted joining the show. "I'm too old for all that," he had told his children, shaking his head as they tried to coax him into participating. But his family knew better. They knew that their grandfather had a presence, a kind of quiet wisdom that audiences would feel the moment he stepped on stage. And they were right. The moment William walked out into the glare of studio lights, the audience noticed him. His movements were deliberate, each step careful yet proud. And there was a warmth in his eyes that seemed to reach all the way to the back row. He wore a crisp white button-down shirt, and over it, a navy blue cardigan that wasn't just a piece of clothing, but a story in itself. That cardigan had been a gift from his late wife Margaret on their 50th wedding anniversary. For William, wearing it wasn't just a fashion choice. It was like carrying a piece of her presence with him onto the stage. Steve Harvey, always attuned to people, spotted it immediately. "Now who do we have here?" Steve asked with his signature smile, leaning slightly toward William as the introductions began. "Mr. William Patterson, sir," the old man answered, his voice rich and calm. 82 years young. The crowd chuckled warmly and Steve's eyes narrowed with a kind of respect. He wasn't just looking at another contestant. He was seeing a man who carried decades of stories, of lessons, of unspoken memories. "How long were you married, sir?" Steve asked, almost instinctively, as if he could sense that William's life held something beyond the surface. 58 beautiful years, William replied. His voice softened as he spoke, the single word beautiful landing like a stone dropped gently into still water. The silence that followed was different. No awkward pause, no missed beat, but the weight of recognition. Everyone in the room understood. This man had loved deeply, and he had lost. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Mr. William," Steve said gently, bowing his head just slightly. "Thank you, sir," William nodded with grace. "But love like ours doesn't end. It just changes form." That single line drew the first round of applause, not for humor, not for competition, but for truth. And from that moment, it was clear that William Patterson was not just another contestant. He was about to become the heart of the show. As the first rounds played out, the Patterson family did well, buzzing in quickly, shouting answers with enthusiasm, and laughing together when something went wrong. William, though, was the calm center of it all. He placed a steady hand on his grandchildren's shoulders, whispered encouragements, and clapped proudly for every effort, whether the board lit up or not. He didn't need the spotlight. His very presence illuminated his family. By the time they reached the fast money round, the competition was neck and neck. The air felt charged, the kind of tension that makes every audience member lean forward in their seat. William's grandson Marcus went first and scored impressively, 203 points. That left William with the task of gathering just 42 more points for the grand prize of $20,000. Steve Harvey walked over to William, cards in hand, and looked at him in a way he rarely looked at contestants. This wasn't playful banter anymore. This was respect. "Mr. William," Steve said, his voice steady, "your family needs 42 points. Are you ready to bring it home for them?" "I'll do my best, Mr. Steve," William answered with quiet confidence. Then he added something that would linger in everyone's mind long after the camera stopped rolling. "Let's make Margaret proud." The first few questions were simple. William answered with clarity and thought, each response hitting solid numbers on the board. Eggs, the park, a cookbook. The score shot up quickly, and before long, the Patterson family had already crossed the threshold for victory. The studio erupted in cheers, his family members clapped and hugged, and Steve smiled in satisfaction. But there were still 2 questions left, and it was the next question, the one that seemed so ordinary, so routine, that would change everything. Mr. William, Steve said, looking down at his card, name the first thing people do when they wake up in the morning. It should have been simple. Brush their teeth, check their phone, make coffee. A dozen easy answers were waiting, but instead William fell silent. His hand trembled slightly on the podium, and his eyes shifted, not toward the board, not toward Steve, but toward his family, and then out toward the audience. And in that pause, in that quiet inhale, everyone sensed it. Something deeper was about to come, something no game show answer had ever carried before. The silence stretched longer than anyone expected. In a studio that thrived on laughter, quick answers, and fast-paced games, silence was unusual, almost unsettling. Steve Harvey tilted his head, sensing that this wasn't hesitation, it was memory. William Patterson wasn't just reaching for an answer, he was reaching into his heart. Steve stepped a little closer, his voice gentle. Mr. William, take your time, sir. The old man's eyes glistened under the studio lights. His lips pressed together for a moment, then trembled as he drew in a deep breath. The audience leaned forward, instinctively sensing that they were about to hear something far beyond the game. When I wake up in the morning, William began, his voice low and thick with emotion, the very first thing I do is look at my wife Margaret's photograph on the nightstand. And I say, "Good morning, my love. I miss you so much today." It wasn't loud, it wasn't theatrical, but it hit harder than any dramatic shout ever could. The studio fell completely still, as though even the air itself was holding its breath. Steve Harvey froze, his cards slack in his hand. The cameras kept rolling, but the show was no longer a show. This was something sacred unfolding live in front of everyone. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, William added softly, his eyes glistening, but his voice steady. That's how long it's been since she left this world. But she's still with me. Every single morning, I tell her good morning. Because love doesn't die, Mr. Steve. It just changes shape. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was a collective gasp. Audience members wiped their faces. Family members sobbed openly. And even the competing Morrison family was caught in the tide of emotion. People weren't just watching a contestant play a game anymore. They were witnessing love in its purest form, surviving loss, defying time. Steve Harvey slowly set his cards on the podium, his throat tightened, his eyes blurred, and for the first time in his career, hosting Family Feud, he didn't know what to say. He walked closer, abandoning the role of host, stepping into the role of fellow human being. Mr. William, Steve's voice cracked, uncharacteristically raw. When did you lose Margaret? William swallowed hard, his shoulders trembling under the weight of memory, but his gaze was unwavering. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days ago. But every morning I still talk to her. Every morning I still keep the promise I made 58 years ago. To love her, in sickness and in health, until death, and even beyond. The floodgates broke. The Patterson children in the audience cried into their hands. A camera operator tried to blink back tears but failed, lowering his rig for a moment to wipe his face. The crowd erupted into sobs and murmurs. Steve, fighting through his own emotion, asked, "Tell us about Margaret, sir. Tell us about the love of your life." William's lips curved into a smile, tender and broken all at once. "I met her when we were 16, he said. She had this yellow sundress that made the sun jealous. She wasn't just beautiful. She was kind. The kind that fills a room and makes strangers feel like friends. We married when I was 22. 58 years, Mr. Steve. We built a life, 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and every night before we went to sleep, no matter what, we always said, 'I love you.' We never went to bed angry, that was our rule. Not once in 58 years. The room was no longer a game show set. It was a chapel of memory, with William as the elder telling his sacred story. His words painted pictures that filled the imagination. A young girl in a sundress, a life built brick by brick, a marriage weathered by time but unbroken. But then his voice faltered. 7 years ago, Margaret was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. At first it was little things, keys misplaced, breakfast forgotten. But then the memories began to slip away. Our children's names, our home address, even our anniversary. She would look at me sometimes and not know who I was. But every morning, I still told her, good morning. I still told her I loved her. Because love doesn't depend on memory, it depends on promise. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. William's family clutched each other. Steve stood motionless with tears running down his cheeks. And even the Morrison family, their supposed competitors, covered their faces, overcome by the weight of his truth. The last morning, William whispered, his voice breaking now into fragments of sound. I walked into her room, like I always did. I said good morning, and for the first time in months, she looked at me, really looked at me. She smiled, and she whispered, good morning, my William. He stopped, unable to continue for a moment. His shoulders shook as his family members reached out toward him. The silence in the studio was pierced only by sobs, the sound of hearts breaking and healing all at once. Those were her last words to me, William said finally, his voice a trembling whisper. And they were worth everything. Steve Harvey, unable to hold back, walked around the podium and embraced William. It was no longer host and contestant. It was brother to brother, man to man, human to human. The studio audience rose to their feet in the longest standing ovation the show had ever seen. They clapped and cried for 8 long minutes. But what happened next made the moment unforgettable. The Morrison family, the very people competing against the Pattersons, walked across the stage. Patricia Morrison, their matriarch, had tears streaming down her face as she wrapped her arms around William. You're not just their grandfather anymore, she said through sobs. You're ours too. You've shown all of us what real love means. 2 families stood on the stage, competitors turned kin, bound not by the game, but by the story of one man's devotion. Cameras caught it all, but no camera could truly capture the feeling in that room. The feeling that everyone had just witnessed something eternal. And yet, William wasn't finished. He still had one more question to answer. The ovation still thundered when Steve finally returned to the podium, wiping his face with the corner of his suit sleeve. He tried to collect himself, but his voice still carried the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Mr. William, he said gently, we still have one more question. But sir, you've already won something far greater than money today. William nodded, a faint smile breaking through his tears. His family was still clutching his arms. Their eyes red, their hearts swollen with pride. Ask me the question, Mr. Steve, he said firmly. Margaret would want me to finish what I started. The studio hushed again, this time not with sorrow but with reverence. Everyone understood they were witnessing something more important than a game. Steve looked down at his final card and read it carefully. Name something that makes a house feel like a home. The audience seemed to hold its collective breath, waiting for William's response. Without hesitation, he lifted his head, his voice calm, assured, and timeless. The people who love each other inside it, whether they're still here with you or watching from heaven. It was not the kind of answer Family Feud usually placed on the board, but it was the kind that wrapped around every heart in the room. The board revealed the closest survey response. Family pictures, worth 22 points. Steve smiled softly, nodding. Close enough. That's family. That's love. That's exactly what you just said. The Patterson family had officially won. Their total soared to over 300 points, securing the $20,000 prize. But in that moment, money felt irrelevant. The applause was not for victory on the scoreboard. It was for the victory of the human spirit. Yet Steve Harvey wasn't ready to let the moment fade into the routine wrap-up. He turned toward the cameras, his voice trembling, but strong. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been doing this show a long time. I thought I had seen everything, but I have never met anyone like Mr. William Patterson. What we just heard tonight is bigger than Family Feud, bigger than television. It's a reminder that real love, Real promises never end. The crowd roared again, but this time their applause had a different energy. It was gratitude, a thank you to a stranger who had just reminded them all of something sacred. In the weeks that followed, the moment didn't simply air, it exploded. When the episode was broadcast 6 weeks later, William's words became an internet wildfire. Clips of him saying, "Love doesn't die, it just changes shape," were shared across platforms. Twitter trended with hashtags like "Jock talk to them every day" and "Love never dies." Within a week, more than 120 million people had watched the moment online. But it wasn't just numbers. The clip unlocked hearts. Viewers from around the globe wrote in, pouring their grief, their love, and their gratitude into letters and emails. A mother from Texas wrote, "I lost my son to cancer, and I still talk to him every night. Watching Mr. Patterson gave me permission to know I'm not crazy. I'm a mother keeping my promise." A widower from Florida wrote, "I lost my wife to Alzheimer's too. For 3 years, I thought I was the only one who still kissed her photograph every morning. Now I know I'm not alone." The Family Feud production team, accustomed to handling fan mail about funny answers or celebrity appearances, was suddenly drowning in thousands of letters that read like diary entries of loss and healing. One producer later admitted, "It was the first time in my career I felt like a television show had turned into a church service. People weren't just entertained, they were transformed." And in Chicago, William Patterson's quiet morning ritual became the foundation of something far bigger. His children, inspired by the outpouring of love, began to dream of a way to honor Margaret's memory in a way that would help others. Within months, they launched the Margaret Patterson Foundation for Alzheimer's families, dedicated to providing counseling, support groups, and respite care for those who cared for loved ones with the disease. The motto of the foundation came directly from William's lips. "Love doesn't die when someone goes to heaven, it just changes shape." At the foundation's first fundraiser, Steve Harvey himself stood on stage, not as a host but as a supporter, donating $100,000 of his own money and telling the audience, "This man right here, Mr. Patterson, reminded me what strength looks like. Not the kind of strength that hides pain, but the kind that feels it and keeps choosing love anyway." By then, William's story had reached even further. Oprah Winfrey invited him for an interview. Newspapers across the country covered the moment. Universities used the clip in psychology and sociology classes to teach about grief, resilience, and continuing bonds. It was no longer just a game show anecdote. It was a cultural phenomenon. And through it all, William never stopped his morning ritual. Every dawn, in the quiet of his Chicago bedroom, he would reach for that silver-framed photograph of Margaret, the one taken on their 50th anniversary when she wore her favorite yellow sundress. He would smile, even through tears, and whisper the same words he had whispered for years. "Good morning, my love. I miss you so much today." The world might have turned his story into headlines, foundations, and hashtags, but for William it remained simple. A man keeping a promise, a husband loving his wife beyond time. But fate wasn't finished with William Patterson. His story wasn't just about the love of the past. It was about the legacy that would continue to ripple outward, touching strangers, healing families, and showing the world that grief and love could live side by side. And soon, William would find himself back on that same stage in Atlanta, surrounded not by strangers, but by the grandchildren who carried his legacy forward. 6 months after that unforgettable taping, the Family Feud studios prepared for something extraordinary. This wasn't just another game, another set of contestants eager for a cash prize. The producers had carefully arranged a special episode titled Inspiring Moments, a tribute to the stories that had transcended entertainment and touched millions. And at the center of it was one man, William Patterson. When the doors opened and William walked onto the stage once more, the audience didn't just clap, they erupted. The thunderous standing ovation shook the studio, echoing through the rafters like applause reserved for legends. But this time, William wasn't alone. Flanking him on both sides were all 12 of his grandchildren, holding his hands, guiding his steps, their young faces glowing with pride. Together they looked like the living proof of everything he had spoken about that first night. The proof that love builds legacies, that promises echo across generations. Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of contestants, didn't even try to hold back his emotions. He walked forward, arms wide, and embraced William before saying a word. His voice broke as he spoke. "Mr. William, how are you doing, sir?" William's smile was brighter than it had ever been. His eyes, though still touched by grief, now carried something more radiant: peace. "Mr. Steve," he answered, his voice strong and clear, "I am blessed beyond measure. That day, something beautiful happened. People all over the world reached out to me, shared their own stories of loss and love. Margaret and I helped people feel less alone. That's a gift I never expected." The crowd roared with applause, not just for William, but for the idea that love could ripple outward and heal unseen wounds. The camera panned across the grandchildren, who nodded proudly, each one silently saying, "This is our grandfather. This is the man who taught us what love really means." The producers had prepared a surprise. On the giant screen above the stage, a montage began to play. Letters and video clips from around the world appeared. Mothers talking about children they had lost, widowers speaking about wives they still spoke to every night, families showing photos of loved ones framed on nightstands. The hashtag "Talk to them every day" flashed across the screen, along with images of memorials, candles, and smiling faces. One woman from Brazil appeared in a recorded message saying, "Mr. William, you taught me that my husband is not gone. He is still with me every morning when I say his name." Tears filled William's eyes as he clutched the hands of his grandchildren. He had thought his ritual was just a personal act of devotion, a way to keep Margaret alive in his heart. He never imagined it would spark a global movement. Steve Harvey turned to him, his voice solemn but reverent. "Mr. William, you didn't just play Family Feud. You changed it. You turned this stage into a place where the whole world remembered what love is supposed to look like. And because of you, because of Margaret, families around the world are healing." The applause swelled again, and William stood quietly, humbly, letting the moment wash over him. He wasn't a man who sought recognition. All he wanted was to honor his wife. But sometimes the purest intentions create the most powerful legacies. The show introduced the Margaret Patterson Foundation for Alzheimer's Families with a short segment, showing footage of support groups, counseling sessions, and caregivers receiving help they desperately needed. The motto appeared on screen in bold letters: "Love doesn't die when someone goes to heaven. It just changes shape." Steve announced that he had joined the foundation as its first major donor and board member, a statement that drew cheers from the audience. When William spoke again, his words were simple, but carried the weight of a lifetime. "I don't know how long I'll be here, Mr. Steve. None of us do. But I know this. Every day I wake up and keep my promise. And I'll keep it until my last breath." That's what love is. It's not just a feeling, it's a decision you renew every morning. The audience rose once more, many of them openly sobbing, clapping with a ferocity that felt less like applause and more like gratitude. Two families had embraced on stage months earlier. Now it felt like the whole world was embracing William Patterson. As the taping ended and the lights dimmed, William lingered for a moment, looking out at the crowd. His grandchildren surrounded him, and Steve stood by his side. For William, it wasn't about fame or viral clips. It was about knowing that Margaret's memory was alive, not only in his heart, but in millions of others who now spoke to their loved ones, who found comfort in promises kept, who understood that grief and love could exist together. That night back in Chicago, William returned to his quiet home. The noise of the world, the applause, the lights all faded. In the stillness of his bedroom, he reached for the silver-framed photograph on his nightstand. Margaret smiled back at him in her yellow sundress, her eyes as alive as ever. William touched the frame with trembling fingers and whispered the same words he had whispered every morning. "Good morning, my love. I miss you so much today." And in that moment, the world outside didn't matter. Television didn't matter. Fame didn't matter. What mattered was a promise made 58 years ago. A promise still alive, still unbroken, still shaping the world one whispered good morning at a time.